This is, after all, an event oriented towards the German-speaking audience in Europe, and so it would behoove us to maintain good time and good schedules, as they're famous for. So let's get started. Welcome to the session on recharging the global economy post-COVID-19 through innovation. Really appreciate you joining at this WB India Summit at the session sponsored by Indiaspora. I'm going to turn it over very shortly to our moderator for this session, Julien Seetharamdoo. But before I do that, I'll just introduce Indiaspora briefly. Indiaspora is a nonprofit organization founded in 2012, which is comprised of very prominent leading Indian diaspora all over the world who are engaged in various different professions and are from various different countries. Our goals are as follows. We work to amplify the voice of the Indian diaspora as a global force for good in the areas of entrepreneurship and innovation, business, investment and finance, academics, philanthropy, politics, and arts, media, and sports. We foster global connections among the top Indian diaspora worldwide, like I mentioned before, from various different professions and countries. And we strengthen the diaspora's links to India. With that said, I would like to introduce Julien Seetharamdoo. And just before I say that, I would like to mention that I'm delighted as the host of the session to have Indiaspora members and prominent friends who comprise this panel. And I'm really looking forward to their discussion. Julien Seetharamdoo, your moderator, is the head of European market strategy at Zurich Insurance and is based in Zurich, Switzerland. He provides macroeconomic and financial analysis on the key issues facing the Eurozone and assesses their implications for asset markets. Prior to this, Julien was the chief investment strategist with HSBC, Global Asset Management's macro and asset strategy team. Julien, I'll turn it over to you now to take it away.
Thank you very much, Sanjeev, and hello everyone, and welcome to the last session of the day. So this session, we're going to look at recharging the Indian and global economies post-COVID through sustainable innovation. So what that means is basically we're thinking about how the global economy is going to look differently, and in particular, how sustainability really is likely to be at the heart of the sort of reset of the global economies, as well as the Indian economies, and thinking a bit what are the implications for companies, but also what are some of the opportunities as well for corporates, and also focusing in a bit on the renewable energy sector and supply chains in particular. So with that, I'll introduce our panelists. So we're lucky to be joined today by Vauhini, Telikapalli, Sushant Rao, and Vaishali Nigam Sinha. Vaishali is not yet online, but we're hoping that she will be able to join us shortly. I think she's just having a few technical difficulties. So just to introduce our panelists, first of all, introducing Vauhini. She's a US citizen currently living in Switzerland. She's the founder and managing director of VEVA, a management consulting company delivering and implementing successful sustainable strategies to clients in industrial, life science, financial, and government sectors. And previous to this, she held several senior management positions at Fortune Global 50 companies, such as Alstom Power in Europe, Dow Chemical Company, and General Motors in the US. At Dow Chemical Company, she was handpicked by the C-level management team to shape, lead, and sustain key strategic business initiatives. And she was also invited by the government of India to shape the national policy framework for solar photovoltaics. Vauhini holds a master's degree in chemical engineering from the US and a bachelor's degree in chemical engineering from India. And she's also presented numerous technical papers at conferences in North America, Europe, and Asia. Our second panelist is Sushant Rao. Sushant is the head of global partnerships at Agility. Agility is a global supply chain and infrastructure company, I think which most of you will be familiar with. We're over 26,000 employees in 100 countries and a strong focus on emerging markets. Sushant works out of the Hamburg office in Germany, and was responsible for global partnerships and communications for Agility. Prior to working at Agility, Sushant was head of Asia Pacific at the World Economic Forum in Geneva, Switzerland. So you can see there's quite a strong connection with Switzerland amongst the panelists that I've introduced so far, myself, based in Switzerland as well. And then our final panelist, who is not yet on, but I'm hoping she will be on soon, is Vaishali. So Vaishali is the Chief Sustainability, CSR and Communications Officer at Renew Power. Renew Power is one of India's largest independent power producers in the renewable energy sector. She's also a strong advocate of equal participation of women in economic activities, and she's also passionate about climate change. She's presented, for example, at the Global Climate Action Summit and the Clinton Global Initiative. Prior to working in this sector, Vaishali worked in investment banking in both the US and Europe. And she's, in June 2020, Vaishali was listed as amongst Asia's most influential women in renewable energy by Solar Quarter magazine. So we're very lucky to have such a distinguished group of panelists to lead us through this last session of the day. So we're going to begin by taking a sort of global macro view, a sort of big picture view of how economies, in particular the Indian economy, but also globally, will sort of manage through this crisis and reset their economies. And then we'll focus in on some particular issues around that. So I'd like to sort of begin this discussion by directing the initial question at Vauhini and then widening out to the rest of the panelists. And when we think about how the global economy is going to sort of look as we come through this crisis, Vauhini, how do you see the global economy and the Indian economy in particular managing through this crisis, and how do you see them resetting themselves as well?
Thank you, Julien, and thank you, Sanjeev, for giving us the opportunity, and also to WB India for giving us the opportunity to present our views on this platform. I just want to take the bigger picture view of the global economy. I don't think there is anybody on this planet that has not been impacted by COVID-19. I believe this is the most tragic human toll that is of this century, and there are so many pressing issues that have come up to the surface, and they have exasperated because of COVID-19. Having said that, every crisis presents a challenge, but at the same time, it also presents an opportunity. And what I'd like to do is walk through the reset process. This pause in the global economy has given us all an opportunity to rethink, and I'm just categorizing them into three buckets. One is the people reset, the other one is the planet reset, and the third is the profit reset, the 3 Ps. I think the people reset, people are the greatest asset, and I believe it's not just the responsibility of the governments to take care of the people, but society as a whole. We need to be, accountable and responsible to take care of people who are underprivileged and, are suffering. And what has happened is the situation has really brought that to the front. Whether you look at both the developed as well as the developing countries. I believe that there needs to be some policies and frameworks in place where investments are made directly towards people. It's not a fair playing and even a playing field at all. 70% of the global population don't have a social policy in place where they can fall back upon. So that needs to be addressed. The inequality needs to be addressed. The second biggest challenge that we have is, of course, the planet reset. This has been an issue which has been talked about for decades. But if you look at one of the silver linings of COVID-19 has a huge impact on the climate science, with travel restrictions, with factories not 100%, with people not traveling, so on. So it has had a huge positive on the climate. So there needs to be regulatory frameworks, policies, which are more towards transitioning us more towards a circular, green, low carbon or zero carbon economy. So that's another point which I wanted to set the stage about. Now, and the third point, of course, is the profit reset. This human tragedy has really given us a reset to think long term, rather than just thinking about profits at every cost. Can we look at profits for the entire society, taking the planet and the people into, rather than just the quarterly outlook that we are all so accustomed to? Obviously, there is a lot of work today. We are all in the containment phase. The next phase, which is going to be a slow opening of the economy, is going to present its own challenges. Post-COVID is also going to have its own challenges. So every country, it's going to be different in different geographies and different countries, even within countries, different sectors, even within sectors, different for different companies. But as a whole, this has given us an opportunity to think differently also in terms of the reset for the profit. Coming to India, India is a diverse and a vibrant economy. If you look at India, yes, like the other countries, it has been impacted because of COVID-19, but there is always, the underlying fundamentals of the Indian economy are very robust. When you talk about the 5 factors, which I just want to mention in my opening remarks, is like, first of all, is coming out of poverty to empowerment. The last 25 years, you have seen 50% of the population just come out of sheer poverty to at least earning, a decent wage per month or per day, or whatever may be the denomination. The second thing is the sustainable urbanization and the consumerization. India is a market in itself. We're talking about some of the cities in India which are going to be comparable to middle-income nations in Europe. So that's the scope that we're talking about. And it doesn't vanish just because of COVID-19. The third and the most important is the manufacturing sector in India. It's the make in India for India and the made in India for the world. I really admire Prime Minister Modi and his policy people to have put this in place. And I think this is going to be a game changer for India moving forward. The fourth is the digitalization. We're talking about 1 billion internet users. We're talking about 350 million smartphone users. So this is just a tremendous opportunity for India as a market. And the last and not the least is unlocking the potential of women in India. And I'm not talking about women in terms of gender parity, but empowerment of women as consumers, as key decision makers, to drive the engine of growth and to drive the engine of economy in India. So with that, I've given my viewpoint. I'd like to turn it back to Julien.
Thank you very much, Vauhini. So that was very interesting in terms of there's 3 sort of things we need to think about: people, planet, and profit, and within that, the context for India. Maybe actually before I move to the other members of the panel, maybe just a sort of follow-on question, if I may, to you. You mentioned that 50% of people in India now have more or less a sort of a living wage as opposed to being in subsistence. But there still seems to be an issue about how does India or emerging economies more generally, how do they manage this transition to a zero carbon economy? What are the challenges for them as opposed to more developed economies with more resources?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question that you asked, and it is not a silver bullet that one can say, okay, this is what, or magic bullet, I would say, that this is what is going to work. It is going to take the government, the private sector, as well as the society in general, and the consumers. And it all first starts with the policy and the framework in place. If we are going to continue to emit and do business like we did yesterday, and if we feel that this is also going to work in the future, it probably is not. I believe rather than looking at sustainability initiatives as something which is a nice to have, it's not like if we should think about it, but how we should think about sustainable economies or green economies. So with that in mind, I think it all starts with the policy framework, the investments, the infrastructure, the people, and of course, it's all of these coming together that can transition us out of this fossil fuel economy to a more climate-friendly, greener economy. This is going to be a transition process. There are technologies in place. Even for a fossil fuel economy, there are technologies in place which allow us to curb CO2 emissions, like carbon capture and storage. So it is not going directly from an oil and gas to a renewable sector, but there are transition points that we could look into and then slowly transition it. It is never going to be a zero carbon economy. It could be a low carbon economy where it's an equal play for all technologies to participate. So that's my perspective.
Thank you very much, Julien. Maybe staying with this first sort of more big picture theme, Sushant, I mean, how would you sort of characterize the resetting of the Indian and global economies post-COVID, and again, in particular, in relation to sort of sustainability as well?
Yes, well, thank you, Julien. Thank you, Sanjeev, also for having us as part of the panel. Working for a company which is in supply chains in 100 countries with 500 offices, you really get quite a global view to the dynamics of different regions and different markets, and then how they're performing and coping with the repercussions coming out of the COVID crisis. And I think to respond to the opening question, I'd like to say that we have to remember that the cylinders of the global economic engine will be firing at different speeds, and we have to expect that the emergence for individual economies out of the COVID crisis will be uneven, and that's in part due to the severity of what is could be described as a sanitation crisis has been quite different from geography to geography. The responses of policymakers from country to country has been quite different in terms of the measures that have been enacted and the results of those measures. There will be different speeds on the easing of those lockdown measures, and the much spoken about fear of a second wave, even as much preparation is underway now in terms of vaccine development and plans for vaccine distribution, it could still happen again. And when we speak about vaccines too, this will be part of perhaps the reason why there would be that unevenness in the emergence out of the crisis, because there will inevitably be some disparity in how the vaccines are distributed and how equitably they are distributed. There are, of course, many stakeholders from international organizations like the World Health Organization, governments, and industry players like us who are working in concert to try and ensure a rapid, effective, and equitable distribution of vaccines. But there's still a lot of infrastructural challenges, for example, temperature control, which is uneven around the globe, having the right amount of containers that can maintain these temperatures, and that will be a challenge that we have to prepare for. The final comment I would make, though, in terms of where we are in terms of the health of the global economy, with or without the COVID crisis, there were certain structural problems that were already challenging the global economy, and they have only been exacerbated or amplified because of the crisis. The crisis, for example, will mean that many governments have to introduce austerity measures. The debt accumulation will be higher, So debt, which was already a problem for many economies, will be exacerbated. And then the much spoken about theme of deglobalization, which was happening perhaps pre-COVID, in part due to trade protectionism and nationalistic reflexes, and was maybe in many ways informed by the US-China relationship. There's even now a China-India dynamic in the COVID times. This means that deglobalization will not only be because of the reorganization of supply chains, but also what kind of nationalistic or protectionist measures we will witness in the months ahead. I think many people will be watching very keenly to the November election in the United States as maybe one indicator as to where that direction might take. But again, these are just existing challenges that will continue to need to be addressed even in a post-COVID era.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good point. It's going to be an uneven recovery, and there's going to be all the challenges that we were used to and focusing on pre-COVID, the COVID challenge of COVID will still be there in terms of geopolitics, etc. Maybe Vaishali, welcome, and maybe just to finish off on this sort of first sort of more macro theme, I could ask you as well for your thoughts on how you see the Indian and global economies sort of resetting themselves post-COVID, and particularly in terms of sustainability initiatives.
Sure. Hi. First of all, thank you for inviting me for this session. Fantastic topic chosen by WB and Indiaspora. So delighted to be here. Maybe what I could do is just talk a little bit about, the renewable energy space and, what impact is COVID going to have with respect to, innovation in the sector. I think from where I speak, which is, India, we see a lot of, commitment to the sector. As somebody just said that it's not consistent. We haven't seen governments consistently kind of committed to the sector, but I can say as a company which is about 10 years old, we've come a long way, and that's the good news, I think, as far as we are concerned here in India. There's been a lot of innovation, and I think that's what's been, I think the commitment has driven the innovation, and the commitment at the policy level, as we've seen in the India story, is very critical for this sector to grow at the rate and at the pace at which it needs to grow for us to be able to meet our goals, 2030 goals. So, maybe what I could do at a high level, just talk a little bit about the success story.
Yep.
We targeted about 175 gigawatts by 2022, and then 450 gigawatts by 2030. And this is a number which is a humongous number when you look at what we have generated over the last years, over the history of India's not only renewable energy, but general energy generation. So I think the ambition which we see in India has been pretty significant, and we are now the 5th largest producer of renewables around in the world.
So these are the targets. These are sorry to interrupt. These are the targets: 170 and 450 gigawatts.
That's correct.
Targets.
Yes, 22 targets, 175 gigawatts. That's correct. And 2030 targets have been set as 450 gigawatt of generation. We already have 88 gigawatts installed, and we have another 35 gigawatts which is under construction, and another 30 gigawatt which has been bid out. So as you can see, there's a huge amount of acceleration as far as just on the ground work is concerned. And if India's demand continues to grow at 6%, which is what the target is, then we should double by 2030. As our targets have grown, so has the need for technological and advances grown. Renewables, when we had entered in about 2010-11, the sector, a lot of our naysayers had said that, renewables is so expensive, who's going to buy it? right? And as we speak now, it is really the cheapest form of energy which is available, out-competing coal in a big way. So these are clearly exciting times for the sector, and that is the big picture sort of a scenario we have here in India. Extremely exciting. And one area which pops out as being a very important area for work is the storage market. And so if we look at the renewable energy space, again, from a high level, what is the issue there? The real weakness there is the intermittency factor, right? We don't get sun 24/7 and the wind speeds vary. So when we were entering this business, a lot of people who are blessing us said that you need to start praying to the sun and the wind god, so because we were extremely dependent on, solar and wind. The batteries become very critical because you need that to kind of deal with the intermittency issue. And we are watching this sector very carefully. There's going to be a huge amount of innovation and the prices are going to come down as one is expecting them to. So, exciting sector to watch. Hybrid is also another area. So it's no longer, we started as a wind company and then entered solar. What we are seeing is hybrid is what is being pushed by the government. And there's a lot of sort of complex combinations which are taking place to ensure that the growth of the sector is not stopped. So I think the innovation we are seeing at the policy level has been extremely impressive in India, and that's been great. One area which I think in a post-COVID world, which is going to be very critical, is the EV market. And we can expect, our two-wheelers, etc., and other public transportation means here to, shift to e-mobility. And that's an area where we can see that, air pollution is a big issue. It's unfortunate that 22 cities in India are the most polluted cities in the world, not a statistic we are proud of, and we want to do away with that. So we're going to see a lot of thrust in that area. And yeah, a lot of, I guess, solar panel related technological innovation is also expected. And that's going to bring the cost down. It's going to increase efficiency. So we are also this space. Again, we do a lot of work and asset testing on the ground with respect to wind related technology. And so whether it is, increasing mast heights, whether it is, the lightness of the blades, etc., we are seeing a lot of effort and funds going into research in this area as well. So we, as I said, are ourselves focusing heavily on digitalization and exploring robotics, whether it's like, saving water, cleaning our modules, etc. So that's the sort of landscape, I would say, for the sector as far as innovation is concerned. And that's what's going to accelerate the growth of the sector going forward as well. These are my initial comments.
Thank you very much, Vaishali. I mean, that brings us very neatly on to the second area we wanted to discuss, which was around renewable energy and power generation. And you mentioned actually the progress in India is already quite substantial in terms of renewable energy. In terms of electric vehicles, is that something that you're already seeing, or is it really something that is more an aspiration for the future from the government? Or in terms of the development of electric vehicles, replacing existing fleets of vehicles in India?
Sorry, is that a question?
Vaishali, yeah, it's a follow-on question.
Oh, okay. Yeah, sorry. So can you just repeat it very quickly?
So, in terms of, you mentioned the electric vehicles, and I was just intrigued to understand to what extent that is an aspiration from the government to start to introduce electric vehicles, or have you already seen some electric vehicles introduced in India in terms of two-wheelers, or is it more of an aspiration going forward?
Definitely, it is not only an aspiration. We've seen a policy action in that direction. We have seen corporates commit towards the sector as well, and we've begun to see the rollout. But if we look at it on a relative scale, if you were to ask me, we have a long way to go compared to some of the other markets. But definitely, it's way beyond an aspiration. We have seen a commitment not only by the government but also by the corporates to roll out, EVs, as I mentioned, more in the public space. There are a lot of issues with respect to the private space, private sector, and adoption at the retail level. I think that's going to take some time. But definitely the journey has begun with quite a lot of commitment from, public sector, private sector commitment. Yeah.
Thank you very much. So maybe broadening out, asking some the other members of the panel. Vauhini, you've worked and consulted, I think, in the renewable energy space in India and elsewhere. So what's your perspective on how things are developing now?
Add on to and build upon what Vaishali said. Of course, the seeds of the renewable energy were planted about 2 decades ago. But at that time, there was such a disparity between the cost of electricity for a fossil versus, the cost of electricity because of renewables. And India is a very cost-sensitive market. The other aspect was the policies were all driven towards coal and gas. And coal still is a predominant, I believe it's still 50% of the energy, the source of energy for power generation is still coal. So it's not, but can we better manage coal? Can we have technologies in place where you could still, because like I said, it's not going to be a switch from fossil to non-fossil. There has to be a stepwise change in terms of moving more towards a non-fossil or a renewable energy sector. I still believe, like Vaishali was saying, it's a hybrid system where you have the conventional power, which is 70% of your power generation, 30% is your intermittent mix, whether it is going to be a hybrid solar wind, whether it is just wind. Wind actually is much further along than solar. That's just out in the public literature. And also looking into other sources like biofuels, would also kind of help drive the low carbon economy. But I do want to emphasize that there is also this drive of having the distributed energy versus grid connect. So it is not just the generation part of it, but also the transmission and distribution part that has to be kept in mind. So the infrastructure has to be in place, because there are so many transmission distribution losses that we see, almost 20 to 25%. So it's not just the generation side that can be looked into, but it has to be the entire value chain, right from generation to transmission to consumption as well. So what good is it that we have, a very good efficient system of generating it, but we are losing during transmission and during consumption, whether it is energy efficiency or building appliances which are more energy efficient, or consumption of power, both by the industrial sector and the non-industrial sector. So it's the whole value chain, because I think the energy is the engine for any economy. So the energy part first probably will have to be tackled post-COVID to get the economy also up and running, in addition to all the health issues that Sushant mentioned about. So I do feel very upbeat about the renewable energy sector in India. It's so nice to hear, because when I was in 2007 visiting Government of India and was on the panel of the solar mission, they were talking about a couple gigawatts, and now to look at 88 gigawatts installed, it's just marvelous to hear such success stories. So that's my view. It is the industry, the governments, and the consumer and the market that have to all tie in together. Let's look at the holistic value chain, not just the consumption part, the generation part, but the transmission and the consumption. So that's my take on the renewable energy sector.
Thank you very much, Vauhini. And maybe turning to you, Sushant, and in particular, given your background in supply change and value chains. How do you see that being impacted by this move towards sustainability in India and elsewhere?
Yeah, I think there are two angles. If I build on the points made by Vaishali and Vauhini, there's one angle of sustainability for us, which is how we as a global supply chain company work towards making our supply chains greener. And in the recognition that, you know, there are many parts of the value chain and the supply chain where we're dependent on other stakeholders. For example, the airline industry or ocean liners or road transportation companies. And there are ways that even in the COVID area, we can see the demands on supply chains may have shifted, but they're also intensified in other areas. With more people at home, for example, home delivery has now become, in many markets around the world, much more prevalent. There's a more open-minded now to this, and but there's also the related emissions with an increase in home delivery. The second way in which we look at sustainability, however, is the sustainable growth of economies. And for us, that means really taking stock of all the elements of an economy that are going to allow it to be successful. And for us, again, from our position of serving a lot of large multinational corporations who are actively engaged in global trade, we know that concurrent to that, that's only addressing about 5% of global business. 95% of global business are small and medium enterprises. And as such, they are the lifeblood of any economy around the world. And, you know, they talk a lot about how COVID has given to many sectors, whether societally and industry, politically, an impetus to push digitalization. It was already the game changer for small and medium enterprises. Technology is what allowed small and medium-sized businesses to become micro multinationals. It allowed them to open new markets, to become a part of global trade. And but tied to this is also a recognition, especially in COVID, is that there's still many challenges. Once you engage in global trade, you're quickly confronted with questions like, well, how do I move my goods? How do I contend with very complex documentation, different custom regulations? And COVID showed too, with the disappearance of many passenger flights that were previously carrying cargo, that suddenly capacity was drastically less than before. So how do you get transparency on where there's capacity? What are the rates? And so for us, again, coming back to sustainable innovation, that means our commitment to investing in the digitization of the logistics ecosystem. We're doing that through our digital logistics arm called Shippa, where we're making it easier for smaller and medium-sized enterprises to be part of global trade by giving them faster, more efficient, and low-cost ways to access things like rates, to get greater visibility of where their goods are, and to have information on how to unlock problems, for example, when goods get stuck in transit, stuck in customs agencies. So these are the two, I think, key elements, in my view, about some greenification of the supply chains and ensuring that economies are sustainably growing by supporting their small and medium-sized enterprises.
And do you see, and just a follow-on question to you, Sushant, I mean, do you see, are there some gaps that need help or filling? Is there, I mean, do governments need to do more, for example, to support that process? And also on the other side, are there opportunities for corporates as well in this development?
I mean, to the question on the governments, I mean, yes, one way in which they can support is to facilitate that push towards digitization. One example would be if you look at something like air cargo, and the percentage of air cargo transactions which are still on paper, it's shocking. And any ways in which the related agencies and governments can stipulate that has to now go into electronic transaction certainly helps, because it allows emitters to move with that stipulation into digitized transactions, using blockchain, etc., creating more transparency. So that's certainly one way in which governments can help.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so maybe sort of moving on to thinking a little bit about what the next sort of 5 to 10 years look like. So really, this is sort of two themes wrapped in one. I mean, how different do we think the sustainable landscape will be in 10 years in India, for example? Will it be a radical transformation, or do we think it will be more modest? And then a sort of maybe related theme, when we think about sustainability, we can make other definitions of sustainability that focus more on inclusiveness. And to what extent do we think inclusiveness is progressing in India and elsewhere, and in particular in terms of engagement of women in the corporate sector in general, in particular in terms of sustainability, and what do you think needs to happen to accelerate that as well? So sort of two related questions, but both thinking about the future of the sort of next 5 to 10 years. And maybe I could start with getting your thoughts on that, Vaishali. Could you hear me, Vaishali?
With me?
Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I mean, my immediate answer to that is that I think the adoption of renewables in India is not in a small way or with some sort of inhibited commitment. If we have to achieve our targets, which I mentioned, 360 gigawatts by 2030, it is a huge effort. And, if I could just give you one number, which tells you the story that, we will have to generate as much from renewable energy alone in 10 years that we have managed to generate from all sources in the history of our country so far. Okay, so it's not going to be a small scale exercise. And because it has to be a large scale exercise, we are lucky in India. Vauhini also mentioned that our leadership is committed, and we are moving in that direction at the right pace. So I think that's the good news. If I look at the other areas of good news, because it's also good to look at good news when we talk, because often it's hard to kind of fish out what's when we look at what's happening around California, what's happening in other parts of the country, in the world, there's a lot of bad news. But the good news is the investors have shown commitment now, big time. They've said that they're not going to be investing in coal, etc. And so ESG has become a centerpiece for investment consideration. And I think we all have to understand that that's a real big move in the right direction as far as this whole journey is concerned. And in a post-COVID world, I like to call them AC and BC in so many panels. I found that quite catchy. But in an AC world, as they say, sustainability is not going to be a matter of choice. I think it is going to be a center stage. I think governments will have to accelerate their stimuli packages. They will have to encourage adoption of green projects. We have learned over the last few months ways to kind of survive in a green way, whether it's corporates, whether it's individuals, whether it's government. I think there have been a lot of learnings, and we have to convert these learnings into actually, policy measures at the top and adoption at the corporate level. So a lot more scope for corporates to adopt renewables. We are pushing it in a big way here in India. And I think that's going to have a huge impact in a greener world, in a greener AC world. I'd like to talk about inclusiveness in the sector, and I think that's very important, and that's where the bad news is. I see in this space, there's a huge amount of opportunity for engagement of women. But when I look around me at any discussion, I'm so glad to see we have like a 50% participation here in this conversation at least. But if I look at boards, if I look at leadership, if I look at employees, generally speaking, there are very few women. They're not engaged because you know why? They see this as a very hardcore infra space. But that really is not the case, because there's so much of scope for R&D, which is academia, and I think women are deeply engaged in academia, and it's an auto kind of opportunity for them. So we need to do a few things. We need to engage women. We need to engage them when they're young. So a lot of push for STEM related programs. So we support a lot of programs for women in STEM, girls in STEM. We are running an accelerator program, for example, for women's engagement in entrepreneurship as it pertains to sustainability. So not only renewables, but sustainability as a broader area of engagement. Also kind of leading and an engagement. I know we're talking a lot about inward focus, but I do believe, that eventually the world where we have reached we cannot be inward focused. It may be something people will stop, countries will stop and emphasize on, but we are going to be a global world. Climate issues cannot be addressed independently, individually, and in an inward-looking manner. So the engagement of women, I think globally, I'm chairing South Asian Women in Energy platform, fantastic platform to engage, to learn from each other. So I think inclusivity as far as gender is concerned is very important. I think what I've also seen is, the last mile connectivity, which we've been able to push, has been great. So energy access is an area which is going to catapult this whole journey forward. And I think we should all commit to that as well. I'll stop here, but these are some of the important areas to make this more inclusive. And the journey in India is going like this. And so that's the good news.
So thank you very much, Vaishali. So maybe turning to you, Sushant. So what are your thoughts in terms of how the sort of sustainability landscape will look like in 5 to 10 years? And in particular also in terms of discussing about inclusiveness, how that might look as well, or what we can do to accelerate that progress.
Yeah, and I definitely want to latch on to Vaishali's message of good. Of course, I think it's been extensively discussed in the previous panels. We're not ignoring the fact that there are certain challenges that continue to be addressed, from the red tape to engaging more women into leadership positions, etc. What I see, though, however, as some points of optimism for India in a post-COVID order. One is, we just look at the simple fact, part of the recovery is tied to having a vaccine. India already holds 60% of global vaccine production. So India will play a very critical role in the global recovery from this health angle. Secondly, we were talking a lot about digitalization and the way that can be an empowerment to SMEs, to women business owners, etc. And India, is amongst the top 3 exporters of software in the world. And as more companies now look at ways in which they can make their business processes more efficient, possibly also under analyzing business process outsourcing, again, India will be a beneficiary from that push. But another area where I think India, just within its own market, will be a big beneficiary is the explosion of e-commerce. The e-commerce market in India is set to grow to $200 billion by 2026. And it's facilitated by a rapid increase in internet penetration, in smartphone penetration. India was already, before COVID, one of the fastest growing smartphone markets in the world. And again, when one thinks about the small, medium businesses we've been speaking about before, many of them have used that opportunity to take a greater role in e-commerce. They're now businesses which are visible to customers in Germany, to customers in Brazil, and they're now with the right tools and digital logistics like the ones we provide, able to get their goods into global markets. The final point, though, I would say in terms of, let's say, a positive news is that, we talk a lot about the reallocation of supply chains and how many companies will be rethinking this or have already begun that process. One of the reasons for that is because of dependency on China, which has 28% of global manufacturing output. India's percentage of global manufacturing is at about 3%. India still imports more than it exports in quite a few manufactured product segments, but that gap is closing. And the reason why I see that as an opportunity is that the potential to grow from that 3% to 10% to 15% as manufacturing shifts to India, as companies like Renew Power are making energy more accessible, more available, it will make India as a manufacturing base more attractive. And the benefits that flow from that are immense, because manufacturing is a high productivity sector. It means that it creates jobs. And it's clear that India will have to create literally tens of millions of jobs in order to sustain its economic growth in the future. And coming back to Vaishali and Vauhini's point, a big part of that equation will also be not only enlarging manufacturing, but making sure that half of India's human capital, who are women, are part of that growth trajectory and story. So that's how I see the outlook for India.
So there's quite a lot in there in terms of opportunities for corporates in e-commerce, IT, and the development of manufacturing. Maybe just turning to you, Vauhini, to sort of round up on this last theme. So again, thinking about what the world will look like in 5 to 10 years, and in particular India from a sustainability perspective. And then also, secondly, how you see inclusiveness developing in India and what more can be done to accelerate that progress as well.
Absolutely. Building upon both Vaishali and Sushant's points, first on the sustainability part, I believe that sustainability is going to be the lifeline of the 4th industrial revolution. I still remember 15, 20 years ago in the boardrooms where sustainability was like a nice to have to look good on the annual, on your annual reports, it's a CSR, but that no longer is the case. We've come a very long way also in sustainability, where it has now become a function. What sustainability now has become a part and parcel of the fabric of the business itself. So it's not just a corporate function, but it has now gone down and trickled down to the business level as well as to the product level. And that's great news, because if the mindset for anything that we do, whether we're designing a new product or we are looking at sustainable logistical value chains, or whether we are looking at the renewable space, because people feel if it's something green, then it's sustainable. That's not what the case is. Whatever we do in our everyday life, it's all walks of life that we think about sustainability. I think the thing that I could sum up with is looking at sustainability more from a return on capital point of view for the businesses and for the corporates, more for a growth opportunity, because there may be so many innovative ways. If you look at management of waste, so many different product lines, so many new business segments have come into play because of sustainability, because of the way of the mindset shift and thinking that we have. And of course, the third one is the risk management. When you look at your entire value chain, you see where the weak link is. And if you're able to look at it from a sustainable point of view, you are making your risk management process much predictable. And obviously, it has an impact on your bottom line earnings. So all I'm saying is let's look at sustainability from a growth perspective, from a return on capital, as well as on the risk. Well, now coming to inclusiveness, which is one of the very, what should I say, important topic that I believe in. I'm just going to share a personal story of mine. I remember growing up, I was the first engineer in my entire family to get into engineering school, and this was 25 years ago. And there were so many advices that were given to my father, is like, no, why not medicine? She should get into something which is more made for women. And I look at India now, and I look at so many software engineers, hardware engineers, mechanics, women pilots. I mean, this whole boom that is happening is just so heartwarming to see as a woman where and how much we have progressed. But of course, there are limitations. It's, I think, the patriarchal society that we have in India, and it's also a mindset shift, right? I mean, it all eventually it comes down to at a family level, what inclusiveness means. It's before marriage, after marriage. I mean, there are so many dynamics that come into play. But what I would say for India as a market, let's look at women, because women, most of the major decisions are made by women. All the high ticket purchases, whether it's home, whether it's a car, whether it's vacation planning, typically it is the woman who drives the decision. So if we can make women as part of the consumer market, there are statistics which show that you could add up to $1 trillion in the Indian economy by having this inclusiveness. But it all starts again with policies. We can't put it just on the governments, but it is also on the corporates, the small to medium-sized enterprises, the family-owned businesses. So happy to see the programs that Vaishali has talked about, to have women as part of the consumer market. They make the decisions, but they also consume these products that we're talking about. So their say is very important. So on the corporate level, let's have policies in place which has more gender parity. Let's change the mindset thinking. But the most important thing is also the mindset thinking of the society at large. Women are the key decision makers, and that's going to be the future moving forward. So let's accept that and make it more of an inclusive society. That's what I feel. Julien, thanks.
Thank you very much, Vauhini. I think that's a very inspiring note to end the discussion on. It sounds like there's some progress being made, but clearly a lot more to be done. But at least some progress is being made. So I think we've actually used up pretty much our whole allotted time. I'm not seeing any questions at the moment online. So I think we can maybe wrap up there. But just to thank the panelists once again, Vaishali, Vauhini, and Sushant, thank you very much for your participation and your insight. And I hope it's been useful to the audience as well. And I'll hand back to Sanjeev to lead us on then to the end of the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julien, Vauhini, Vaishali, and Sushant. This has been an extremely illuminating, informative discussion on a wide range of subjects pertaining to India and globally in regards to how the post-COVID economy will be recharged through innovation, but importantly through sustainable innovation. As all of the panelists noted, sustainability and inclusiveness are not buzzwords anymore. They are far, far more important than that. They are core to the mission of every organization that sees itself moving forward in the right direction for the future. So in closing, I'd just like to thank Wolfgang Bergthaler and the WB organization for allowing Indiaspora to partner with them on this WB India Summit. I hope that the viewers have enjoyed it. I certainly did. And thank you again to the panelists. With that, goodbye from this session. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.